Hi, everybody. Is that good? I'm setting a timer because I always over-prepare, and it's like drinking from a fire hose. So here we go today. There we go. Back to our Old Testament series on historic books of the Bible and talking about Samuel today. And so remember, Wendell told us these are narrative stories mostly. There's poetry in the second chapter even of 1 Samuel, but primarily narrative. The purpose of narrative is retelling historical events. And so again, today, 1 Samuel. Going back and review, well, we had Ruth 3 weeks ago and then Judges 4 weeks ago. In Judges, we see this cycle of the Israelites, everything's going well. And then, except for the fact that they're declining into sin, which leads them into oppression by their neighbors. They call out to God for deliverance. God delivers them through a judge. And then there's a time of peace until things go down again. And each time this is told, this is a spiraling circle down and down and down into probably the lowest point in the Old Testament history, or certainly one of the lowest points, where every man is doing right in his own eyes. And then along the scene comes Samuel, who's the last of the judge then. So here's what I want to talk about today. Here's an outline. First, I want to look at the book and say who, what, when, where, and why about the book of Samuel, background. And then 3 vignettes from the book. There's so much to talk about. It would take a week of Sundays to do this properly. But I'll give 3 quick vignettes, and then I want to reinforce that this is history. This is not mythology, as so many people claim that the stories of the Bible are mythology then. And then we'll see how much time I have for applications. So who's the author? Well, who's the author of Samuel? Actually, the Talmud, the Jewish writing from about 100 to 500 A.D., attributes the book to him. And he did write 1 Samuel 10:25, then Samuel told the people the ordinance of the kingdom and wrote them in the book and placed it before the Lord. And also in 1 Chronicles, now the acts of King David from the first to last are written in the Chronicles of Samuel the seer, and in the Chronicles of Nathan the prophet, and in the Chronicles of Gad the seer. So we do know that Samuel wrote. But here's the problem. Remember this was one book. Here's 1 Samuel from, one got cut off there. So 1 to 31, and then 2 Samuel 1 to 24. And here's the problem. Samuel dies here. So clearly he couldn't have been the author of most of the book. And we don't know that the writings that he did write are the exact words we have in 1 Samuel. We do know that he wrote a history, but we don't know. So really, the book is anonymous. We don't know who wrote most of the book. So there we go. I didn't know that until I started studying for this. So who are the people that are in the book? Well, all of the books, remember, are about God and God's story, right? It's his story, history that we're reading, right? So the narrative is first and foremost about God. And then we have Samuel as the last judge, Saul as the first king, and David as king. But remember, David was also a shepherd growing up. He had a lot of time out in the wilderness to practice throwing rocks out of his sling from a very young age, and that comes to fruition later on. And remember, he was the psalmist. Remember, Saul picks up a spear to hurl it at, I said that wrong, didn't I? David picks up a spear to hurl it. No, I'm sorry. I'm an old man, and I'm sorry. I'll get it right. Saul, the king, has David as his court musician to calm him when an evil spirit comes upon him. And Saul, when that evil spirit comes on, picks up a spear to throw it and pin David against the wall. So David wrote a lot of the Psalms on the run from Saul. Then there are secondary characters. Hannah is the mother of Saul. Eli, the priest, and his two wicked sons, Hophni and Phinehas. And then Jonathan, Saul's son. So here I just thought this would be interesting. Here are psalms that were inspired by David and written during this time of 1 Samuel. And then there are also other psalms that David wrote during 2 Samuel. So here, Psalm 54 was written when the Ziphites, who are the Ziphites, tell Saul that David is hiding among them. David is on the run, as he is for most of the second half of the book. He's on the run from Saul. Now I'm afraid I'm going to switch the name Saul and Samuel. So anyway, he's on the run, he's hiding, and they say, oh, by the way, I think you might want to know, King Saul, that David's hiding among us. 1 Samuel 23, 19 to 21, the Ziphites came up to Saul at Gibeah saying, is David not hiding with us in the strongholds of Horosh on the hill of Hakilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? Now then, O king, come down according to all the desire of your soul and do so. And our part shall be to surrender him into the king's hand. Saul said, may you be blessed of the Lord, if you have had compassion for me. The Ziphites were of the tribe of Judah, but evidently they didn't like Saul. So, they're Jewish then. So David writes Psalm 54, which says, it's a prayer of defense against enemies. For the choir director on stringed instruments, a Mazgil of David, when the Ziphites came and said to Saul, is not David hiding himself among us? Save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your power. Hear my prayer, O God. Give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers have risen against me, and violent men have sought my life. They have not set God before them. Selah. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the sustainer of my soul. He will recompense the evil to my foes, destroy them in your faithfulness. Willingly I will sacrifice to you. I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me from all trouble, and my eye has looked with satisfaction upon my enemies. So again, David, not only the king, but the poet, right? Writing during this time. Okay, that's who. How about what? Well, remember Wendell told us 3 levels of narrative. So in the first level, we have the events themselves. And then the second, and more to come on that, the second level is the story of God's covenant people, the establishment of a kingdom in Israel. And then the highest level is the ultimate king will come and will redeem his people. This is ESV Study Bible. The first third of 1 Samuel pits the decline of Eli and his sons against the rise of Samuel, so that the readers should picture these chapters in the form of an X, Eli's decline occurring simultaneously with Samuel's ascent. The remainder of the book is likewise an extended X in which the decline of Saul is played against the rise of David. In this phase of the story, the stories of Saul and David are intertwined as readers are kept up to date on the tragic decline of Saul and in the life of the king in waiting as a fugitive. Okay, who, what, when did this happen? So I've taken the timeline and I actually made it match a graph. So you can see not only the 7 periods that Wendell talks about, but how long each period lasted. So does anybody remember the first one, 2000, creation up to 2000? What did Wendell call that? Anybody remember? Wendell? Beginnings. Okay, does this trigger anything? Okay, no, I guess not, huh? What's that? I remember. Okay. Anybody remember what came after beginnings? The patriarchs, would you say? What did he say? The afters. Go to the head of your class. They deserve you. The patriarchs. Okay, well, Wendell, do you remember them? Yeah. Okay. The third one. Before that, I guess we have an excuse. Huh? Heck, I even gave the sermon twice. Okay, I know, I'm teasing you. The sojourn, right, in Egypt and the return and the conquest of the land through the book of Jeremiah. Then we have the United Monarchy, and notice that this is the shortest of the time periods, about 1,000 years from, 1050 to 950. And then does anybody get the next one? Thank you. Divided monarchy. And then after the last king, the Israelites and Judeans go into exile. And then after they go into exile, they return from exile. And then we have the closing of the Old Testament and the intertestamental period until Christ is born then. So here's 1 Samuel initiating the kingdom then, anointing Saul, and then also David as king. Where? Well, here's the Dead Sea, here's the Jordan River, here's Gaza. Anybody heard of Gaza before? Has that been on the news recently or anything? Here's Ashkelon. Up here is Ashdod. So these things happen right in the middle in the highlands. Here, this is all coastal plain here, and this is a valley, right, the river, and this is all flat uphill, so this is all uphill. Here's Bethlehem, Jerusalem. Shiloh is Eli's home, and that's where the temple is located that Hannah goes to. Ramah is Samuel's home. Gibeah is where Saul's headquarters are. Bethlehem being David's home. So all in the central highlands around Jerusalem, north of Jerusalem is where this takes place. And I always have a hard time with the enemies, the Moabites, the Perizzites, the Ammonites, the Lusites, the Masonites, and all those guys, who they are. So here's David. Remember, Goliath is a Philistine, right? From Gath. Do you remember that? So here is Gath, right there. Here's Hebron, here's Jerusalem. So here's Shiloh. So all the stories taking place like in this area. David flees. You can see the cliffs here. David flees there. Here's the valley where David and Goliath, they met on opposite sides of the hill here. So here's all the central highlands and the flat coastal plain there. There were 5 main cities in Philistia. Ashdod, same city, right? 3,000 plus years old. Ashkelon, Gaza, 3,000 plus years old. Gath, Ekron. So they're the Philistines then. And they were the descendants of Noah through Ham, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So these are Noah's offspring. Again, I have a hard time with all these. Carrie talked about Ruth coming from Moab. Well, here's Moab on the other side of the Dead Sea. And she also mentioned incest between Lot and his daughters. When his daughters saw that he had no son to carry his line, they decided that they would give their father offspring through him. So Lot and his older daughter produce Ben-Ami, from which come the Ammonites. And that's younger daughter, Lot and his older daughter produce a son named Moab. Those are the Moabites. And the Edomites come from Isaac, producing Jacob and Esau. Remember that? and Esau steals his brother's birthright for a pot of stew. Remember that? You know, he comes in and says, "What is this red stuff?" So Esau is named Edom, which means red. And from there comes the Edomites. And then Isaac and Esau also have another descendant, Eliphaz, and those are the Amalekites. So kind of to help me remember, because I'm an old guy and I can never remember where these nations are. Ben Ami, right? Ami, and I've got A-M-E. A-M-E, I can pronounce that Ami. Ammon, Moab, and Edom. And that'll help me remember them, and maybe as you read through, you know, hopefully you read through this book and these books and help you remember where they are. Okay, who, what, when, where, and why was it written? Wendell gave all the people and the elders gave all the people who were teaching this book as one of our background readings for it. And he can say it better than I do. The books of Samuel, 1st and 2nd, right, deal with the establishment of the kingdom in Israel and its theological significance. The books begin with Israel still under decentralized system, the judges, right, of the judges period, and end with the Israelite monarchy firmly in place. They begin with the last of the judges, Samuel, and end with the first and the greatest king in the line of Judah, David. Well, he's the second king there. At this point, I was going to play I can't do justice to the book, and we were running a bit late today. Go for it.
How long is it?
7 minutes.
It's pretty good.
Can we get the lights?
The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. They're two separate books in our modern Bibles, but that division is due simply to scroll length. It was originally written as one coherent story. We're just going to cover the book of 1 Samuel in this video. So after Israel was rescued from slavery in Egypt, they made a covenant with God at Mount Sinai and eventually came into the Promised Land. And there, Israel was supposed to be faithful to God and obey the covenant commands. Before the book of Samuel, Judges showed how Israel failed at that task big time. It was a period of moral chaos, and it showed Israel's need for wise, faithful leaders. The book of Samuel provides an answer to that need. The book of Samuel's story focuses on three main characters: the prophet Samuel, where the book gets its name, and then King Saul, and after that, King David. And all three of them transitioned Israel from a group of tribes ruled by judges into a unified kingdom ruled by King David in Jerusalem. And the book of Samuel has a fascinating design that weaves the story of these three characters together in four main parts. Samuel, he's the key leader and prophet in the first section of the book, but then he also plays a key role in the next section, which is Saul's story, and it's told in two movements: Saul's rise to power and then his failures. And the second part is about his downfall and his tragic death. And then the drama of Saul's demise is matched by David's exciting rise to power. And then David's story is told in two movements. First, he rides the wave of his success, followed by his own tragic failure and the slow self-destruction of his family and then his kingdom. The book concludes with an epilogue that reflects back over the whole story. So let's dive in and see how this all unfolds. Part 1 picks up from the chaos of the book of Judges, and we're introduced to a touching story about a woman named Hannah. And she's grieved because she has never been able to have children. And by God's grace, she finally has a son named Samuel. And in joy, she sings this amazing poem in chapter 2. And the poem is all about how God opposes the proud and exalts the humble, about how despite tragedies and human evil, God is working out his purposes in history. And also it's about how God will one day raise up an anointed king for his people. Now, Hannah's poem has been placed here at the beginning of the book to introduce these key themes that we're going to see throughout the whole story, like the next one. Samuel grows up and becomes a great prophet and leader for the people of Israel, at the same time that the Philistines rise to power as Israel's arch nemesis. And in this crucial battle, the Israelites get arrogant, and instead of praying and asking God for help, they trot out the Ark of the Covenant as this kind of magic trophy that will automatically grant them victory in battle. And so because of their arrogant presumption, God allows Israel to lose the battle and the ark is stolen. So the Philistines, they take the ark and they place it in the temple of their god, Dagon. And then the God of Israel defeats the Philistines and the god Dagon without an army by sending plagues on the people. And then the Philistines don't want the ark anymore, obviously, and they send it back to Israel. And the point of this little story seems to be this: God is not Israel's trophy, and he opposes pride among the Philistines, but also among his own people. And so Israel needs to remain humble and obedient if they want to experience God's covenant blessing, which opens up into the next large section. The Israelites come to Samuel and they say, hey, we want a king like all the other nations have. Go find one for us. And so Samuel, he's kind of ticked off and he goes to consult with God. And God says, yes, their motives are all wrong, but if a king is what they want, give them one. And so we're introduced to the figure of Saul. Now, Saul is a tragic figure because he begins full of promise. He's tall, he's good looking, he's a perfect candidate for a king, but he has deep character flaws. He's dishonest, he lacks integrity, and he seems incapable of acknowledging his own mistakes. And so these flaws become his downfall. He wins some battles at the beginning, but his flaws run so deep, he eventually disqualifies himself by blatantly disobeying God's commands. And so the aging Samuel confronts Saul and Israel. He had warned the people that they would only benefit from a king who's humble and faithful to God. Otherwise, the kings of Israel will bring ruin. So he informs Saul that God is going to raise up a new king to replace him. And so Saul's downfall begins, as God at the same time is working behind the scenes to raise up that new king. It's an insignificant shepherd boy named David. He's the least likely candidate to be king, but the famous story of David and Goliath shows that God's choice of David is not based on his family status, but simply on his radical and humble trust in the God of Israel. And so this story embodies all of the themes of Hannah's poem. Proud Saul and Goliath are brought low, while humble David is exalted. From here, we watch Saul slowly descend into madness, while David rises to power. So David starts working for Saul as a general, and he's winning all of the battles, and he's also winning all of the fame. And so Saul gets jealous, and he starts chasing David around, hunting him, trying to kill him. David's done nothing wrong, and so David simply runs and waits in the wilderness. And here we see David's true character. He has multiple opportunities to kill Saul, but he doesn't. He simply trusts that despite Saul's evil, God will raise up a king for his people. What's interesting, too, is that many of the poems of David that you find in the book of Psalms are linked to this very period of his life, and they all express the same attitude of trust. And so this section of the book ends with Saul coming to a grisly death after losing a battle with the Philistines. 1 Samuel tells some of the most intricate, well-told stories you find anywhere in the Bible, and the
Can you stop it
characters
there?
Saul and David, they're portrayed very realistically. And
Thanks. And get the lights and back to my slides. Thank you. Okay, so I want to, of all those events, it would take a month of Sundays, as I said. Of all those events, I would like to highlight three and encourage you to read the book for yourself here. So first is the character talking about Eli. He's the priest, we've said. In 1 Samuel 4, we see he's old, he's overweight, he falls backwards off his chair and dies at the end of his life. He's the father of Hophni and Phinehas, and Hophni and Phinehas, now the sons of Eli, were worthless men. Worthless. They didn't know the Lord. So these guys are bad. 1 Samuel 2, now Eli was very old. He heard that all his sons were doing in Israel, how they lay with the women who served at the doorway of the tent of meeting. He said to them, why do you do such things, the evil things that I hear from all these people? No, my sons, for the report is not good, which I hear the Lord's people are circulating. If one man sins against another, God will mediate for him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for the Lord desired to put them to death. So you see how bad they are. So that's Saul and his family going. On the other hand, we have Hannah going up. And this just, reading this slowly just blew me away, and I just wanted to take a little bit to talk about it here. Now, there was a certain man in Ramath-Zophim from the hill country of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So that's a story that in our congregation we've heard a lot, and we know the heartache that it brings to people who want to have children and can't have children. So that's Hannah then. She was probably the first wife and then couldn't bear children, or they didn't bear children, so Elkanah marries his second wife. But it gets worse. Now this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, they would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to her sons and daughters, but to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had closed her womb. So you could see this is going to be the friction and conflict in the marriage as well that's going on. Her rival, Peninnah, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So imagine being infertile, unable to have children, but there's another wife in here who's constantly shoving it into your ribs and provoking her. Can you imagine the situation that she's in? It happened year after year. As long as she went up to eat in the house of the Lord, I went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her. So she, Hannah, would weep and not eat. So she's in the temple praying and weeping for her situation. She, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly and made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you indeed look at the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, that I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. That's the Nazirite vow. Shave your head, abstain from all sorts of things, and be purely dedicated to the Lord. So she says, if you give me a son, I will give him to you, and he will serve you his whole life. I will not abandon him, I will give him up to you. 1 Samuel 1, 12 to 15. Now it came about as she continued praying before the Lord, Eli was watching her mouth, the priest, right? As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. And Eli said to her, how long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you. Imagine how heartbroken it is. She's being provoked all the time. She's in the temple. She's pouring out her heart. She's crying. I can't remember the last time I prayed to God and was so discouraged that I was actually crying out to God. Crying, literally crying, you know? And the priest says, hey, you're drunk. Knock it off. Can you imagine? Can you imagine this? I mean, what a story. But it's history, right? But Hannah said, no, my Lord, I'm a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Then they rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord and returned to the house in Ramah. And Elkanah had relations with Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And it came about in due time after Hannah had conceived that she gave birth to a son. And she named him Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. Then the man Elkanah went up with all his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. But Hannah didn't go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. This is chapter 1. Right? Now the boy Samuel was growing in stature. Here's Hannah and her son, growing in stature in favor with both the Lord and with men. Sounds like somebody else, right? We are growing in stature in favor with men. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. It happened at the time when Eli was lying down. Now his eyesight had begun to grow dim, and he couldn't see well, and the lamp of the Lord did not get it going out. Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, that the Lord called Samuel, and here I am. So God is calling to Samuel. And if you remember this story, right, he goes to Eli, and Eli says, go back to bed. You know, and then it happens the second time, and Eli says, well, wait a minute, maybe this is God. Okay, so if he calls you again, then say, here am I, you know, and then God reveals himself to Samuel. Then the Lord came and called us at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. The Lord said to Samuel, behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel, at which both ears of everyone who hear it will tingle. In that day I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves, and he didn't rebuke them. Therefore I have sworn to the Lord, house of Eli, that the iniquity of Eli's house should not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. So Samuel lay down in the morning, then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, but Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he said, here I am. He said, what is the word that he spoke to you? Please do not hide it from me. Listen to this. May God do so to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all the words that he spoke to you. Right? So he knows something bad's coming, because he said, may this happen to you if you don't tell me. I mean, do you get this? This is just amazing then. What's his first message? Eli, God's got to kill your boys. Isn't this just amazing? The whole thing just blows my mind. Okay, vignette number 2. The people ask for a king, right? And it came about when Samuel was old, he appointed his son judges over Israel. We're only in 1 Samuel 8. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain and took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, behold, you've grown old, your sons don't walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the nations. So God has been their leader, God sent judges, and now they say, you know, we've had enough of this. We want to be like all the other nations then. And God, what happened here? But God, the Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they say for you, for they haven't rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king. God says, it's not you, it's me they're rejecting. So is this sin? Well, yeah, it's sin. But didn't God plan to send a king? Yeah, he did. The people have rejected God's leadership, but it accomplishes God's will for the king to be established. It shows God's sovereignty and man's responsibility. Remember in Acts 2, Peter gives a sermon and says, men of Israel, listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in your midst, just as you yourselves know, this man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to the cross. So we see the human responsibility and the sin of asking for a king, and on the other hand, we see that this is what God wanted to do, ultimately to send his son as prophet, priest, and king. Jesus Christ is king. Psalm 2, 6 and 8. But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. So here's Jesus as king, prophesied in the Old Testament. Another one in Psalm 5. Give ear to the words, my words, O Lord. Consider my groaning. Heed the sound of my cry for help, my King and my God. For you I pray. This is David writing these words, right? Calling God the King. New Testament. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who's been born King of the Jews?" Last book, Revelation 19. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He treads the winepress in the fierce wrath of God, the Almighty, and on his robe and on his thigh he has the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So God planned, even though the Israelites sinned in asking for a king, God planned his true king in the upper level, topmost level from eternity. Vignette 3, David and Goliath. Just a few interesting things that I found. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines, remember Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Well, I got this book. I heard Titus Kennedy being interviewed by Greg Kokel, and I was writing like crazy the whole time, and I said, I got to get that book. So I got that book, and I'm glad I got that book, and glad I bought Titus Kennedy's second book as well. The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint, more than 1,000 years older than the Masoretic text. So Masoretic text is the authoritative Hebrew Aramaic text of the 24 books of the Bible. The oldest copy is the 11th century AD. So the oldest Jewish manuscript we have is 1,000 years AD, right? So the Dead Sea Scrolls are over 1,000 years older. And what do they say? The Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls say the height of Goliath was 4 cubits and a span, not 6 cubits and a span. The shorter height was still considerably taller than the average man at the time, approximately 5'5". So he was probably 6 feet. What is that, 6 feet? 6'9", rather than 9 feet. So, you know, there's the older text saying he wasn't quite as high as we all heard then. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. A champion in both ancient literature and in the Bible. We have 2 armies. Why should we waste killing everybody and wounding everybody in the battle? We'll just send out our best guy, and you send out your best guy, and whoever wins, that army has won. You know, without all the death and bloodshed. Okay, this is called single combat. And it happened, again, here's Bethlehem, here's the Philistines, right? Goliath was from Gath, so here's Azekah and Succoth, right there. Azekah and Succoth. And here's the valley between them. Here's the Israelite camp to the north, the Philistine camp to the south between Azekah and Succoth, and the valley runs here, and then the valley runs north. So here's a picture. Here's Azekah. Here's Succoth. Here's where the Israelites camp on the mountains to the north. Here's the valley of Elah. Here's where the Philistines are camping, up on the mountain in the south of this valley. Here's the stream where David would have gone to pick up his 5 round stones. Picking out, you know, he had a lot of practice as a shepherd. Probably battle location somewhere around here. David comes down from their camp. Goliath comes down from their camp, and they meet on this field somewhere. Here's what it looks like. Here's where the Israelites would have camped. So David comes down. Here's the stream right along the edge, dry in this season of the year, and then the Philistines would have been down here. Here's the stream bed, what it looks like during the dry season. You know, so David comes down off these hills, picks up some rocks, and walks straight forward to the battle scene then. And, you know, when I think of ancient warfare, I think of arrows, I think of javelins, I think of swords. I don't necessarily think about a sling, you know. We hear the story of little shepherd boy David and his sling. So we don't think about it, but this really was one of the major weapons of war back in that time. There were a whole group of people who did this purposely, and they started training like at age 2, picking up the slings and slinging them. So can you click that first one? I just want you to see what a sling is like, you know? Would you click the second one?
This is a professional rock slinger, Azogu, and he's really accurate. Azogu spends hours practicing his skills on objects like melons and sometimes even obliterates oranges against rocks. Now I see why Goliath didn't survive.
I mean, the Romans they would have a whole cadre of people slinging. These things would go could go as fast as a rifle bullet would go then. You know, they feared these guys the most. This is a long distance projectile. You can't throw your spear that far. You can't stab somebody that far. You know, they'll go at least as long as arrows go. If you go look up Balearic slings, you watch how far some people can throw these things. So third topic, this is history, not mythology. If you were making it up, would you make, I mean, so many non-Christians claim that the Bible and all the stories are mythology. And by myth, in this case, they mean made up. You know, fabulous stories that were created. Would you make up think through reading through the Bible, right? The division of the land and how many chapters are divided from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. You know, you have a whole map made up. And think of all the people, you know, when I read through that, it's like, I'm sorry, but, you know, you just read those genealogies, you know, that's the way I do. Would you make all that up? Well, okay, maybe Tolkien would. And the language too, to add to it, you know. But you can go check, and these are nowhere to be found on earth. You know, we know that it's fiction. But the Bible, for many, many, many years, was the book of archaeology. They'd read about something, say, wonder where that is, go to the surrounding area and dig and find it. You know, this is history we're reading about when we're reading all these historical books then. 1 Samuel 13. Now, here's something that they didn't know until about just after 1900. Now, no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines, each to sharpen his plow, his mattock, his axe, and his hoe. The charge was 2/3 of a shekel for the plowshares, the mattocks, the forks, and the axes, and to fix the hoes. So you have an agricultural implement. The Philistines don't let you have blacksmiths, you know? So you're dependent upon them for sharpening your agricultural instruments. And the charge is a pim, 2/3 of a shekel. Well, what do you take a shekel and cut it into 2/3? People didn't know. So again, Titus Kennedy, for centuries, Bible translators had no idea what the word pim meant, since it appeared nowhere else in the Old Testament. No ancient lexicons had translated its meaning. However, archaeological excavations at Gezer in the early 1900s uncover a stone weight inscribed in ancient Hebrew with the word pim, and the ancient mystery was solved. So here's a pim. They take a pim, they put it on the balance, and you want your tool sharpened, you add silver until they balance out. There's no 2/3 of a shekel, there's a pim. Isn't that cool? This is real stuff then. That a champion came out from the armies of the Philistine named Gath. Well, this is Gath. There's an excavation of the area. They've been excavating it. And they found an ostracon, a piece of pottery. So think a plate or a bowl. And what's written on this? Analysis indicates that the inscription representing two names or a name and a word. The first appears to be a form of the name Goliath, although scholars differ on the exact interpretation of the letters and the translation of the text. So, what happened? Oh, can you go back to that? Maybe my battery died. I guess my battery died. I'm almost done. Next. I'll have to say next from now on. Next. Pim. Next. Ostracon. Gath, Ostracon. Next. Analysis. Oh, next. However, the inscription comes from the city of Goliath and his descendants not all long after the wars between David and the giants of Goliath, and it records a Philistine or Aegean named Goliath, or one etymologically equivalent, demonstrating the Philistines did live in Gath, and that the name Goliath was used in the city during the time of the monarchy. So it's not, we don't know if it's Gath's food bowl, but we know that Goliath was a name in that time, and we know that they did inhabit this area during that time, Gath. Next. Well, I ran out of battery. Well, okay. So Wendell said in a note to the teachers, part of our task is to whet their appetite to read the Old Testament books themselves and better appreciate what they read based on what you share about the book. I hope I've done that today. I'd encourage you, like, this is the first time, mostly I'm reading through the Bible like in a one-year program. I'm trying to rush, and I have 4 chapters a day. It's like, how fast can I get through this? Because I don't want to get behind, because now I'm frustrated because I'm a week behind, so I don't want to do that. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't know. But I slowed down, and this was like, who said it? Guy Platter. We were talking back in April, or May, he said, I'm amazed at all the stuff is in here that I never saw before. So just read it slowly. Read it with a commentary or Amos. My socks have been blessed like crazy in doing this, and looking at the book of First Maps. I didn't know where Ammonites and Moabites are, and, but now I do. This has been really helpful. Greg Kokel recommended a Bible reading plan from the Navigators, and they actually have 3. One, you read 4 sections of the Bible every day. Another one, if you don't want to read as much, you just read the New Testament in a year. And the one I like, you read a reading from the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it looks like this. This is the back of it, month 9, 1 Timothy 1-3, and Psalm 19, 49-64. But listen to this. Okay, we've all seen this kind of stuff, but this is genius, and I love this. You could start at any time of the year. Doom. Mind blown. You mean I don't have to start a Bible reading plan on January 1st? You mean I could start today? And I don't have to worry about if I'm behind on week 1? Suppose I only get half of 1 Timothy 1 read, and I stop there. Is that okay? Think that's okay with God? But I told you I'm going to read the Bible in a year. Doesn't matter. Are you reading the Bible? Are you reading the Old Testament? Are you reading the New Testament? This is helpful for me. It doesn't matter. I did it. It took me a year and 3 months because I wanted to get it done in about a year. But now I'm going to go back to these history books, and I might spend the next 2 years reading these books with a commentary, the book that we were given, and just take my time. Who cares how long it takes me? Not in a race, as long as I do it before I die, but even if I don't, what's that matter then? So here's John reading 1 Samuel. And here's how I like doing it. I like reading it. Some people like book. I like reading it on my full computer screen. And you can see I like reading the NASB. It's what I was out when I first became a Christian. It's what I memorized is NASB, so I like reading NASB. But I like having ESV study Bible notes next to me. And I like highlighting, like yellow is, oh, that's interesting. Green is, whoa. Blue is like, Holy cow. So that's how I read. Did I do it again? I did it again. I hit the wrong button. This is our history. Israel's a vine, Paul says. Some branches were cut off. He says to the Romans, you, Gentiles, were grafted in. We were grafted into a root that's thousands of years old. This is not just reading about the ancient Jews. This is our history. God's only always had two people, right? Those who believe in him and those who don't. However you want to parse it out, and people will parse that out differently. That's how I look at it, you know? These are my ancestors. Samuel's my ancestor in the faith, trusting God. Okay, well, I'm finally finished here. So thank you very much.